Thank you. I think we're now recording, is that correct? Yes. Thank you and welcome to the Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meeting, 17th May 2021. On behalf of the panel, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land, the Ku-ring-gai people, on whose land we meet. Today, the order of business, firstly, in line with social distancing requirements to limit the spread of the COVID-19 virus, Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meetings may be held using conferencing technology until further notice. Today's meeting will be conducted over Zoom. Any person speaking today at the meeting are advised that their voice and personal information, including their name and address, will be recorded as part of the meeting and made publicly available on Council's website via live stream and on-demand access, except for any part of the meeting that is held in closed session. Accordingly, you must ensure that your address to the panel is respectful and that you use appropriate language and refrain from making any defamatory statements or discriminatory comments. Ku-ring-gai Council does not accept any liability for statements, comments or actions taken by individuals during a meeting of Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel. People connecting to this meeting by conferencing technology are reminded that under the Local Government Act, the recording of meetings by a member of the public using any electronic recording device, including a mobile phone or video camera, is not permitted. Any person found recording without the permission of Council may be expelled from the meeting. Please note, on-demand viewing of each Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meeting will be available until the holding of the subsequent meeting, and recordings of the Ku-ring-gai Local Planning Panel meetings are copyright protected and cannot be reused or reproduced without approval from Council. We have no apologies today from staff or from the panel, and I'd like to introduce our panel today. Our expert panel members are Sandra Robinson and Greg Flynn. Our community panel member is Suzanne Jolly, and I will be your chair, Jacqueline Townsend. The panel has no declarations, but I haven't received any, so I can just confirm each panel member. Could you confirm that you have no declarations for today's meeting?
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you, Sandra.
Nothing to declare, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Greg.
Nothing to declare, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And are there any staff declarations of interest to declare today?
No, Madam Chair.
No, thank you. We have a number of speakers today on the one item that's at the public hearing today. The item before us today is 60 Cowan Road, St Ives. It's alterations and additions to an approved seniors housing development, DA 003019, including the construction of an additional dwelling and car space. The current application number, DA application number, is 046820, and we have three speakers against, and we have one speaker for the application, who's Mr. Greg Boston. I'm happy for Mr. Thomas, because you're speaking on behalf of a number of people, I'm happy to allow you 5 minutes today for your address, but all other speakers, you'll get 3 minutes. Kerry Frey will take the time today and will notify you once your time is up. So when you're ready, I'll call on Martin Thomas. If you can unmute yourself. Can all the other speakers make sure they're on mute at all times? And once you have addressed the council, can you then wait online pending any questions from any panel member to you? So Mr. Thomas, when you're ready, you've got 5 minutes. Mr. Thomas, are you there?
Hang on.
I can ask him to unmute. He's on the telephone, so it might be him.
Can we not go to him and unmute him?
We can't. We can only ask him to unmute.
Okay. What about, we'll go to the next speaker then, Mr. Verco, James Verco. Are you there, James? No. Tim Jensen. Mr. Jensen, you're there. We've heard from you. Are you there now? No. I wonder if the council chambers needs to unmute everyone.
Oh, we can't, when they dial in, we can only request for them to unmute.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Mr. Jensen, are you on the line?
Yes, this is Tim Jensen here.
Great, Tim. Thank you. Well, you're the only one who's off mute, so we'll take your 3 minutes address when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much for hearing me. Just as an overall overarching comment, I just wish to strenuously object to this proposal. And the bases are, first of all, the loss of privacy and amenity, which is currently enjoyed in my backyard at number 62 Cowan Road. So I'm the immediate next door neighbour to this proposed development. Currently, the backyard is completely private, and this privacy will be completely and absolutely destroyed if this hulking 3-storey monstrosity is approved. There'll be 3 stories of people gawking to my backyard. Secondly, I'm just astounded by this, and I would suggest there are no real grounds for this application, and I would suggest that the council can't do anything but refuse this. So let me explain. The land is currently zoned R3, medium density residential. And under this zoning, even to quote the Ku-ring-gai Municipal Council itself, it says, quote, residential flat buildings are prohibited in the R3 zone. So quite clearly, it cannot be a residential flat building. So if it's not a residential flat building, what is it? You will recall that the developer originally ended up in the Land and Environment Court and got approval under the guise of the SEP, Housing for Senior or People with Disability, 2004. So that was the approval that he's currently has received. So noting that this DA to modify his existing approval is not under the guise of this SEP, and it certainly cannot be, because again, if we reflect on this SEP at all, it has, and if you just look at 2 of the relevant clauses, so just 2 of the clauses in this SEP, it says, quote, the height of all buildings in the proposed development must be 8 metres or less, 8 metres or less. It also says a building that is adjacent to a boundary of the site must be not more than 2 stories in height. Well, this proposed development is clearly on my boundary, and it is proposing 3 stories in height. So the current DA fails both these tests. So all I can say is, since the DA for this 3-storey block is in a residential zone where residential flat buildings are expressly not permitted, and it can't be under the guise of the SEP for Housing for Seniors and People, because again, it's more than 2 stories high. How can it be approved? I'm astounded. This proposed development represents a gross overdevelopment of the site that is not in the spirit of the R3 zone, which prohibits residential flat buildings, nor in the spirit of the SEP for Seniors living, which limits buildings to 2 stories. It also directly adjoins an area zoned for low-density detached housing and doesn't represent an adequate transition between the higher density town centre buildings and the low-density areas to the northwest. I should also say, and I've mentioned this in my submissions previously, that there are currently no 3-storey buildings at front Cowan Road. There's been some comment by the council talking about numbers 20. Numbers 20 is a construction site at the moment, so there's certainly no 3-storey building there. The council talks about numbers 22 and 24. Both those 22 and 24 have a sub-basement car park and 2 stories on top of it. And recall that this DA is proposing a sub-basement car park with 3 stories on top of it. Council also referred to numbers 46 to 50 Cowan Road, but currently, to this day, those are residential detached housing blocks with single and double-storey houses. There's certainly no 3-storey houses on either of these. So I say again, would like to reiterate this would be the first 3-storey building which is fronting Cowan Road.
Thank
Some
you.
other buildings may have 3 stories on the rear where the land slopes down, but the land here doesn't slope down.
Thanks, Mr. Jensen. We have any questions from the panel for Mr. Jensen on his address? No?
No.
No? Greg, did you want to? Sorry, we can't hear Greg. We can't hear.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I was just wondering if I could just ask some staff some questions just to clarify some of those issues that were raised.
Yes, thank you.
So the DA at the current that we're dealing with today is a development application for alterations to seniors housing under the local instrument, isn't it, rather than the SEP?
Jonathan Goodwill.
Just want to clarify so the objector knows what we're talking about.
Can you hear? Can you hear, Jonathan, Mr. Jensen?
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the answer to that is has been submitted under the local environmental plan, which does specifically allow the seniors housing land use or the R3 zoning.
And it doesn't have a height control in the instrument or the head of consideration?
There's a development standard for building height of 11.5 metres, which the proposal complies with. Okay.
Thank you. And just to ask the question, have any 3-storey developments been approved in Cowan Road?
They have been approved, yes, and those are referenced in the report.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Miss Suzanne and Sandra, they don't want to ask any questions. So thank you, Mr. Jensen, for coming to make that submission today to the panel. I appreciate that. All right, now we'll try to see if we can get back our other 2, which are, what's that thing? Do we have Mr. Thomas there now?
I have sent him a text and Mr. Boston a text to ask him to unmute.
What about Mr. Verco?
Mr. Verco didn't get my invite, so he's just been on the line. Okay. Send him an invite. Mr. Thomas and Mr. Boston, is he gone?
Mr. Boston's there.
Oh, Mr. Boston's here. Okay, do you want to?
No, but Mr. Boston, you're there on the line, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So, Mr. Boston, can you just hold on, please, because you're actually speaking for the application. Mr. Thomas, you're now here and can speak.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
My name is Martin Thomas of Unit 1, 58 Cowan Road, St Ives, Strata Plan 75754, comprising 3 villas and 8 apartments. Number 58 driveway and Villa Unit 11 adjoin the south and west boundaries of number 60 Cowan Road. I'm today authorised to speak on behalf of number 58 Owners Corporation, 5 fellow residents, the Cowan Road Action Group and the St Ives Progress Association. We speak collectively against the officer's recommendation for approval. We feel let down and express 3 specific concerns, denoted A, B, and C. A, levels, height, and streetscape. This DA, as a subsequent alteration to that approved by the Land and Environment Court in July 2020, seeks to reinstate level 3 at number 60, removed from the DA by the applicant prior to LEC submission to ensure its approval as a 2, not 3-level development. Approval to reinstate to level 3 would be first circumvent the LEC ruling and compromise counsel. Notwithstanding its legality, the objective of this DA appears morally and ethically wrong. It fails the pub test and shows counsel failing the declared interests of objecting Cowan Road residents. Second, it be inconsistent with the predominant Cowan Road streetscape of 1 to 2 levels. And third, it would reinstate the unacceptable loss of visual privacy and increasing shadowing, especially over Villa Unit 11. B, maintaining the protections afforded by the July 2020 LEC consent to DA 003019. The LEC judgment in Annexure A set out clear conditions which provide us with the protections sought, including but not limited to 1, a dilapidation survey and report, 2, tree protection measures, and 3, noise and vibration minimization measures. It is imperative that these 3 protections be maintained and applied equally as a condition of any approval Council may give to DA 046820. This does not appear to be the case set out in the assessment report. C, precedent. DA 016819 for an aged care development at 46 to 50 Cowan Road, St Ives, travelled a similar path. The applicant removed the top and third floors to get the DA LEC approved as a 2, not 3 level development, as seen from the street. Approval of DA 046820 will create the precedent for that developer to apply to reinstate its level 3. This would be totally unacceptable. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. In relation to your comment under B, there was 3 points. There was tree protection, noise and vibration. What was the first one? I just missed that.
The third point was it would reinstate the unacceptable loss of visual privacy and increased overshadowing, especially of Villa, that's number 58, Villa Unit 11.
And then you had 3 points under the conditions under the LEC decision.
Yes, I did. I'll repeat them. They were 1, a dilapidation survey and report, 2, tree protection measures, and 3, noise and vibration minimization measures.
Thank you very much for that. I'll just ask the panel members if any of them have any questions for you, Mr. Thomas. Panel members, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
None. No one has a question for you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you for coming and speaking on behalf of all those residents in the surrounding area. That's much appreciated that you all consolidated your one submission and you presented it, so thank you. We now have James Verco. We don't have him.
I sent him an invite. I don't see that he's dialed in yet.
We don't have him. Did you have his number? So we're just waiting to hear from that one last submitter.
James Verco.
Oh, James.
Join the meeting.
James, thank you, Mr. Verco.
Yes.
Thank you. We're waiting for you. So apologies for the lack of invite to now. But you're here with us, so that's good. When you're ready, would you like to start your submission?
Yes, I will. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm also getting it live streamed, so I'll have to turn that off.
Join the meeting.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Thank you. We're waiting for you. So apologies for the...
Mute your live stream because we're getting a feedback.
So that's good. When you're ready, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so thank you for the opportunity, and I'm speaking on behalf of the owners and residents of the 6 apartments at 56 Cowan Road. A lot of what I had to say has been covered by the previous 2 speakers, and so I'll just, to shorten the thing, I'll just emphasise my main points. Firstly, should Council approve the proposed development, it would circumvent the decision of the Land and Environment Court made in court proceedings number 2019-207-561 in relation to the DA 0030/19 on the site, thereby failing to protect the interests of existing residents in this part of Cowan Road. At that time, the applicant was granted leave to amend the application, which they did. The amendments included a reduction in height from 3 to 2 stories, and the size of the units were reduced. excuse me, and the number of units was changed from 8 to 6. We just contend that council must reject this current application. We believe that the proposed development is unable to meet the principles of context and neighbourhood character, density and built form and scale. The architectural drawings show that the finished building will have zero architectural merit and strongly disagree with the statements contained with the applicant's statement of environmental effects that the proposal is compatible with its surroundings. The proposed building is not compatible with surrounding land uses, nor is it sensitive to both the natural and built environments as required under the provisions of SEP HSPD. Therefore, we believe there is a statutory impediment to the granting of consent. I think I'll point out the only other point that hasn't really been made strongly. We can see no valid argument why the proposed development should be exempt from the requirement to limit the building to 1 story over the rear 25% of the site. We hold that compliance with that requirement is both reasonable and necessary for this development, and certainly important to the neighbour on the western boundary, as it's been made by Mr. Thomas. So thank you very much. I think that covers everything I wanted to say, together with the information from the other objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burko. Panel members, do you have any questions?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank
No,
you.
Madam Chair.
We have no questions. Thank you. We have no questions. Now, Mr. Boston, thank you. We're now ready to hear from you. So if you can unmute your phone and you can start your 3 minutes now.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
Fantastic, thank you. Look, I'm here primarily to answer any questions that the panel might have. We've reviewed the staff report, which we believe comprehensively deals with the assessment criteria and the resident submissions raised. We don't raise any objections to any conditions contained within the draft consent, including the deferred commencement condition, which effectively links the previous court approval to the most current application. The application is for an additional apartment, noting that the site is zoned R3 medium density. Seniors housing is permissible in its own right without needing to go to the state planning policy. There's a height control of 11.5 and an FSR of 0.8, which applies to the land. The proposed development certainly complies with both of those core controls. And in terms of setbacks, this additional third story, which, as I said, complies with the height, is set back some 19.6 metres from the front property boundary and 14.6 metres from the rear boundary, such that it will certainly be recessive as viewed from the front and rear of the site. The assessment report deals with side boundary setbacks and the privacy concern raised by Mr. Jensen. We believe that the separation to that front-facing balcony is adequate. There is integrated privacy attenuation measures through both privacy screening to windows and also solid balustrade edges and planting. And to that extent, we are comfortable with the staff's assessment and recommendation in that regard. Apart from that, I just wanted to point out that there are a number of conditions contained within the draft consent going towards the issues raised in terms of construction impacts. Condition 17 and condition 31 collectively require pre and post development dilapidation reporting on surrounding properties. Condition 28 goes towards noise and vibration, noting that all the suite of conditions which were applied by the court in relation to the bulk excavation and more generally the construction impacts generally in regards to noise and impacts on trees and vegetation will all remain valid as they relate to the construction of the lower levels of the development. And to that extent, the draft conditions before you today are there to supplement or augment the conditions which are already in place in relation to development on the land. Apart from that, Madam Chair, I was here to answer any questions that the panel might have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Boston. What I'd like to hear is an explanation, and I'm sure the other speakers on this would also like to hear the reasons behind the applicant's proposal of doing a development in the way that this is being put forth. As you could appreciate, you've got a matter that goes to the court and there is a decision, and now that level that I believe wasn't there the first time is now coming back. Maybe on the applicant's intent behind the way that they've done this.
Sure. Look, it's certainly a little unusual, Madam Chair, and the background behind that was that there are a number of seniors housing developments already in Cowan Road, as you're probably aware. There was an upzoning of the land, if you like, to R3 medium density residential, where seniors housing was permissible in its own right. Notwithstanding that, the original application was lodged pursuant to the state planning policy, and the state planning policy's got a number of very rigid development standards, which are primarily to protect amenity where you're in the lower R2 or R1 residential zones. Now, those controls are an FSR of 0.5, which is obviously disparate to the 0.8 FSR control, which applies to the subject land, a maximum height of 8 metres to the uppermost ceiling rather than the 11.5, which applies on this particular site, and then also controls in regards to single storey in the rear 25. So the fact that the application was lodged under the SEP made the third storey element, although anticipated given the height control that applies to the land under the LEP and also the FSR that applies under the LEP, that it made it extremely difficult to justify the clause 4.6 variation requests, which were required to justify the variations when assessed against the SEP. So what effectively happened is a separate application under the LEP provisions was applied to get the one additional apartment at the upper level. Unlike the SEP provisions, that apartment applied for under the LEP is fully compliant with the height and the FSR controls and also council setback controls. And to that extent, it was a way to get a 3-storey development with an FSR which was more reflective of the 0.8 to 1 FSR standard applying to the land on this particular site. So yes, it was a little unusual. The first application probably shouldn't have been made pursuant to the state planning policy because it wouldn't have had the same restrictions applied to it in terms of FSR and height, but notwithstanding, this application seeks to remedy that by applying simply under the LEP.
Were you involved in the first application, Mr. Boston?
Look, I got involved reasonably late. Yes, I was. But the pathway in terms of applying under the state environmental planning policy had already been established. But I certainly was involved through the court process and obviously been involved with this application as well.
Panel members, do you have questions?
Yes, please, Madam Chair. Sandra Robinson. Mr. Boston, had the application been, I just want to be comfortable that this strategy hasn't resulted in cherry picking of the controls. And I just wanted to understand if this development was as a whole considered under the Ku-ring-gai LEP, would it look the same or would it have extra setbacks or more landscaping, or what? How would it be different, or would it be the same as what you're now proposing?
Yeah, look, the current application as a whole, so taking into account the additional apartment and what has previously been approved by the court, in my view, it is compliant with the LEP and the DCP provisions, noting that the original court case, the controls that were applied in regards to the setbacks were certainly the controls pursuant to the DCP provisions. And as I said, the development as a whole is still below the 0.8 to 1 FSR threshold in the LEP. It's below the 11.5 threshold in terms of height in the LEP. And as the assessment report correctly identifies, in terms of setbacks and landscape outcomes, it is also consistent with the DCP when assessed as a whole. So no, I don't believe this is about cherry picking. I believe it is about achieving the reasonable development of the land given its zoning and its location relative to the St Ives Village shopping centre and public transport. That wasn't achievable pursuant to the original application because of the additional restrictions placed on development in terms of FSR and heights being less than those anticipated on the current site.
And the LEP was the same when the court considered it? There's been no change to the LEP?
Yeah, correct. But the court, the previous application, because it was made pursuant to the SEP, the LEP height and FSR standards simply weren't applicable to the application. So whilst they could be used as a guide, they didn't provide environmental planning grounds, for instance, to vary the 8 metre height standard or the single-storey rear boundary setback provision. But of course, the rear boundary setbacks, as previously approved, are maintained. The upper level, as I said, is back 14.6 metres from the rear boundary. So no, look, they just simply didn't apply, unfortunately, whereas they do now, having regard to the application being made under the LEP provisions.
Thank you.
Greg?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask Greg Flynn here. Greg, so what? Just explain why you didn't actually just make application for a seven unit senior housing application, separate, standalone.
With when the original application was lodged, well.
Now, why you've got a consent from the court for 6? Why didn't you just make another application for seven units, a separate, not amend the original court case?
Yeah, sure. So look, the original court approval obviously stands, so it stands on its own. This application proposes the additional apartment. Now, there's a provision in the Act which enables 2 consents such as this to effectively be consolidated. And the deferred commencement condition deals with any inconsistencies between the two. So there was simply no requirement or any utility in reapplying for the works that were approved pursuant to the previous court proceedings.
Thank you. Just in another matter, the original application, was it determined by council or was it a deemed refusal?
Look, that's probably a question better directed to staff. I believe by the time the application went to appeal, it was a refused development, but I could stand corrected if staff tell otherwise.
Could the staff just clarify that point? Thank you.
I think we've got Mr. Garland just looking at that. Yeah, we might need to take that on notice and come back to that. Ms. Jolly, Suzanne Jolly, the community rep, do you have any questions for Mr. Boston?
No, Sandra and Greg have both asked questions that I was going to ask as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Boston, and thank you to all our speakers. What we'll do now is close the meeting. So as the chair, I'll close the meeting. Again, thank you all for your attendance and for your submissions. Very well put, and that all will be taken on board along with all written submissions on this application by the panel. So I'll now close the meeting, and the panel will retire to deliberate on the item before us today, and the decision will be posted on Council's website within 48 hours of the close of our meeting. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, staff. I'll now call it end.
Thank you very much.